Hi everyone and welcome to Jillian in the Kitchen. Today we're going to be making a pumpkin spice cake with cream cheese frosting. This is one of my favorite cakes for the fall. It tastes similar to a carrot cake, but that hint of pumpkin is perfect for fall and winter. Alright, so to start, what we want to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees. And while you have that going, you want to make sure to prepare your cake pans. I'm going to be making a 6-inch cake, and I'm going to be doing it in 2 layers, so I have 2 pans set up. I've buttered and floured them, and I also have a parchment round on the bottom to keep this cake from sticking. After you have those set, you can just set those to the side. And now we're going to mix our dry ingredients. So we're going to need 2 cups of flour, just all-purpose flour. There's 1 and 2. And then also you're going to need a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of baking soda, baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. So after you have all your ingredients in the bowl, you're going to go ahead and grab your whisk and then just whisk them all together so they're evenly combined. And go ahead and set that for the side right now, and now we're going to move on to our wet ingredients. Okay, so in my stand mixer, I'm starting with 2 cups of granulated sugar, and onto that I'm going to add some canned pumpkin, which is 15 ounces. We're going to go for the whole can, and just add that into there. And once you have all the pumpkin in, you're going to go ahead and attach your blade, and just beat that. As this is combining, I have 4 eggs that I've cracked into a bowl, and I'm going to add them one at a time into my mixture as it's beating. Now you want to make sure that you add the eggs one at a time. You don't want to add them all at once, or they're going to probably just end up in the middle of your cake instead of being dispersed all around. So let it be combined and then add another egg. You want the mixture just to be on a low setting of speed. You don't want it to be too fast, so then you'll have pumpkin everywhere. Okay, go ahead with third. So now that all the eggs are in, I usually like to take the mixer and go ahead and stop it, lift it up, and go in between the blades and just on the sides with a rubber spatula and just scrape down the bowl so you make sure you have all the sugar, the pumpkin, the eggs, everything's getting combined in your bowl before we start adding the dry ingredients. After scraping down the sides, we're just going to go ahead and add 3/4 cup of oil to this. You want to do it gradually, not all at once, like the eggs. And let the mixer spin that all together for a few more seconds. Alright, so now for the dry ingredients. I like to add my dry ingredients, again, a little at a time. We don't want to put it all into the bowl at once. So I use just a measuring cup and just fill it halfway. And as the mixer is spinning, I'll just gradually add my dry ingredients. Now before I add my next round of dry ingredients, I'm going to let that incorporate so I don't see any more flour in the batter. So once it looks pretty clear again, I'll go ahead and add another scoop of dry ingredients. And I'll continue that until I've used all of my dry ingredients. So just like we did with the eggs, we're going to go ahead and stop the mixer about halfway through the process of adding dry ingredients. And we're going to go ahead and scrape down the sides again. Sometimes flour can get stuck up on the top of the blade and on the sides, and we just want to make sure all of that's in the mixture. So once you have that scraped down, you can go ahead and start it again. And continue adding your dry ingredients. Usually it takes me about 3 or 4 addings of dry ingredients. That's about how much you should be adding each time. Okay, so now we have all of our dry ingredients in, so you can go ahead and detach your paddle. I like to take my rubber spatula and just scoop all this extra batter off of it so we can get all of the possible batter into our bowl to use as much as you can. And then we'll go ahead and put that in the sink. So now it's time to put the batter into our prepared cake pans that we made at the beginning. So you want to make sure that you have about an even amount of batter in each pan. So I start with one, pour some in, and then I'll stop and come over to this other one, pour some in there, and I'll just go back and forth so I make sure that I get a good amount of batter in each one. You don't want one to be so big and the other one to be too small, so even them out as best you can. Alright, so now we have our cake pans filled. As you can see, they're about halfway filled. Don't fill them all the way to the top, because then what's going to happen is your top's going to start to crown, the top will be baked, but the middle won't be, and it'll just not be a good situation. So now we're going to go ahead and put these in the oven. Again, we're at about 350 degrees, and we're going to bake them for about 30 minutes. Make sure that you have these in about the middle rack of your oven. That way they'll bake nice and evenly. And try to put them in the middle of the middle rack. Alright, so there we go. I'm going to go ahead and set our timer. Alright, so our cakes are done. Let's check them out here. Ooh, they look perfect. Right, so you can always use the toothpick test, but another way to do it is just to touch it softly with your finger, and if it springs back at you, you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them from the oven and set them on a cooling rack over here. Now you want to let them cool for about 30 minutes, maybe even an hour, because this is going to have a cream cheese frosting and we definitely don't want it to melt. And if you have some extra batter, you can always make some cupcakes. Okay, so our cakes have been cooling for about 30 to 45 minutes, and now it's time to take them out. So before we flip them out of the pans, I've prepared a baking sheet just with some parchment paper, and I sprinkled some granulated sugar over it. This is where I'm going to put the 2 cake layers once I flip them out, and the granulated sugar keeps them from sticking. So a perfect tool to use to get your cake out of its pan is a plastic knife. Now, plastic knives are pretty much useless for anything else, but to get a cake out of a pan, they're very helpful. So what you want to do is just take the knife and run it around the edge of the cake. I always do twice just for good luck. And then you just want to flip it out. And then you'll see your parchment round on the bottom. You can go ahead and pull that off. And then go ahead and put it this side down on your baking tray. Now we're going to do it with the other one. So now that the cakes are removed from the pans, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the top of the cake so that has a nice, flat, even top. So to do that, I'm going to use a serrated knife, and slowly I'm just going to take away this dome here. Alright, so there we go. So you can save this for, in my family we like to eat it, but you can save it for if you want to make cake pops or something else that you can use that for. And then you're just going to take this part and put it back on your baking sheet with the granulated sugar. And now we're going to go ahead and make the frosting. But what I like to do is I like to put these in the fridge while I'm making the frosting, just to get them extra chilled before we put the frosting on. So now we're going to move on to our frosting, which is a cream cheese frosting, one of my favorites. So to make the frosting, we start with 8 ounces of cream cheese and 1 stick of butter, and both of those need to be softened. And to let them soften, you don't want to get them overly soft, or then your frosting is going to be really liquidy and mushy. So probably let them sit out for about 15 to 20 minutes before you start making the frosting. So once those are softened, you go ahead and put those in your bowl, and we're going to beat them together. Okay, as as those are beating, I'm also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And give it about 30 more seconds or so to combine that. Now, after that's all beaten together, I like to take my spatula and again scrape down the sides of the bowls and the blade. So you make sure that everything's getting incorporated before we start adding the sugar. So just as we gradually added the dry ingredients to our wet batter of the cake, we're going to do the same with the sugar and the frosting. We're going to add it gradually. So totally we're going to add 2.5 cups of powdered sugar into the frosting, but I added 1/2 cup at a time. So I've just added our final 1/2 cup of sugar, and once that's incorporated, again I'm going to go with my rubber spatula on the side, just kind of making sure I have all the sugar. As you can see, again, it gets stuck up on the top of the blade and also on the side of the bowl, so it's important to make sure all the sugar is incorporated. You don't want to see any trace of sugar in the frosting. You want to make sure it all is incorporated. Alright, so now it's time to go ahead and fill our cake. So I'm going to take one of the layers that we made earlier and just go ahead and place it in the center of the board. Now I've got a piping bag filled with some of the icing that we just made, and I'm going to fill this layer. So basically all you need to do, I use a 1M tip to do this, but you can use whatever tip you feel most comfortable with. You want to start about 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, not too far, but you want to set it in just a little bit from the edge of the cake, your frosting. You don't want it to be right on the edge, because then when you put the other layer on, it'll just spurt out frosting onto the sides of your cake. You're just going to go ahead and go in concentric circles all the way through. Okay. So there we have it with the filling. So now we use our offset spatula and kind of just go around. If you have a turntable, it's a great time to go ahead and break it out and use it. But go ahead and just smooth this icing out. You can spread it out to the edges, but again, not all the way to the edges, but pretty close. And you can also get down, look at it, make sure that you don't have one side that has a heap of frosting and another that doesn't. Make sure that it's pretty even. Just go ahead and smooth that out. You can go ahead and scrape the excess just right back onto your bowl. And now it's time to put the other layer of cake on. And what I like to do is I like to use the flat bottom as our top. So basically what we're doing is the two sides that were exposed are going to be sandwiched together basically. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip that on. And you can shimmy it side to side and make sure that you have it on there pretty evenly. Look at it. This is your time to make any changes that you want before we crumb coat. So now we're going to do the crumb coat on the cake. Essentially what a crumb coat is, it's a very thin layer of frosting that we put around the cake. And what it does is it locks out all the crumbs from being on the final layer of frosting. So the crumb coat is not going to look pretty, so don't try to be a perfectionist at this part. It's going to be very thin, you're still going to be able to see the cake through it, and it's, again, not going to be beautiful. So what you want to do is take about this much frosting and you're going to just put it onto the top of your cake. Again, the crumb coat, you don't need a lot of frosting to do it because it's going to be a very thin layer. So this should be about good. We might have to add a little bit more, but this should be about good. So what you do now is you're going to start pressing this down gently, but with a little bit of force, and you're going to bring the frosting out onto the sides. Get kind of how it's heaping out on the sides, because then what we're going to do is take the frosting and then take it down onto the sides actually and start working our way around the sides. So as you can see, it's now covering that side, and we're going to do it again over here. And just go around the cake and continue doing that. Like I said, we might need some more frosting. And that's okay if you have to add more, but just remember that you want it to be a very, very thin layer of frosting. This is not your final layer. So now that we're done with our crumb coat, you can see that it's definitely not pretty, but don't worry, it's gonna look beautiful in the end. So I usually keep mine in the fridge for about 30 minutes, that way the frosting will harden enough. And also it's important to put whatever extra frosting you had that we made earlier in the fridge as well, that way it won't melt. Alright, so it's been about 30 minutes and it's time to get our cake out of the fridge. I also took out the frosting a few minutes ago. And now it's time to put on that final layer. So we're almost there. So again, we're going to do a similar technique of frosting like we did for the crumb coat. So you're going to take about this much to start. Obviously we're going to need more to frost our cake, but you don't want to overload it at first. So we'll start with about that much. And then again, we're going to push the frosting out onto the sides. And as you can see, we're having no crumbs come into our frosting. It's just this beautiful, clean, white frosting. And that's the magic of the crumb coat. So, yes, you have to give it an extra 30 minutes, but it's so worth it in your final product. So as you can see, I'm bringing it down like we did before on the sides. Coming around the edges here. Make sure you push down that frosting all the way to the bottom because you don't want to see any of your cake anymore. I usually go around once, get everything kind of covered, and then I might come in again, fill the holes. It's just a process. So as you can see, definitely going to have to add more frosting than just the initial amount that we put on top. So I can just grab it out of the bowl, put it on my spatula. I usually use this for the sides, so I do the top first and then I start doing the sides. A good trick for the sides is just to push it back and forth, and then just kind of keep on making your way around the cake. Alright, so we're basically almost there, as you can see. What I like to do to kind of smooth out my edges is just use the side of my offset spatula and just kind of drag it along the frosting. That kind of gives you the smooth. You can also do that on your sides. Just kind of drag it along. It gives that a nice smooth look. Now, to finish off, if you have any leftover frosting, go ahead and get out your piping bag, sprinkles, whatever you want, and decorate your cake. Alright, so here it is, our pumpkin spice cake with cream cheese frosting. I hope you enjoy. See you next time.